My RetroPC has a micro SD card slot, and what I like to do is have multiple cards for different operating systems and configurations. That works really well, and I put the micro SDs inside standard size SD card adapters labeled with their use case. However, I really wanted a way to have a centralized location that stores commonly used applications, games, drivers, and utilities. Research led me to RetroNAS as it provides services to access files and run applications remotely. So let me show you how I set things up. My ultimate goal with this setup is to have a server where I can have my RetroPCs access installation files for all my games and software, and a location to have necessary drivers. I even want to be able to run games off the network drive, saving me space on my RetroPC. This should also help me continue progress in games from multiple RetroPCs. I also would like to have backups of the important directories and configuration files so I can more easily recover from a bad configuration. As far as I know, RetroNAS doesn't support network booting, so I will not be booting from RetroNAS, just using it for file, app, and game storage. I want to configure 3 operating systems for network access. As I showed earlier, I have 3 different SD cards for them. One SD card for DOS gaming, another SD card for Windows for Workgroups gaming, and the last SD card for Windows 98 gaming. So my ultimate goal is to have all these operating systems access files over the network via RetroNAS. So why RetroNAS? I chose RetroNAS because it has the necessary services built in that will help me accomplish my goals with this project. The services I will be using are either DFS and DOS. This allows me to map a folder on RetroNAS as a DOS drive letter. The other service I will be using will be an old version of Samba that will work with Windows for Workgroups and Windows 98. I didn't use Samba in DOS because I read that it can use a lot of memory. And as many of you know, memory is very important for DOS games, and Ether DFS provides a low memory footprint that is more friendly for games. But I may still attempt to get Samba working in DOS at some point in the future, just to have another option for networking. Now let's talk about the required hardware. On the RetroPC, you will need to have a network card installed. The motherboard on my RetroPC has a built-in network interface card, and drivers for DOS, Windows 3.1, and Windows 98 are readily available. Here's a little more information about this motherboard I'm using. It is a modern motherboard called the ITX Llama, designed to run DOS and early Windows 98 games. I have a quick overview video on this motherboard, so check it out if you want to find out more. You will also need another computer that is running RetroNAS. I'm using a Raspberry Pi 5. The RetroNAS PC will need to have storage to store the files you want. On my Raspberry Pi, I'm using a 1TB USB drive. An Ethernet switch is also recommended, especially if you're connecting multiple RetroPCs. You can try to bypass the switch and connect your RetroPC directly to the Raspberry Pi's Ethernet port, but in my experience, with older PCs, that would only work if you had a special crossover Ethernet cable. Then just make sure the RetroPC and the RetroNAS server are configured properly and you're good to go. My setup looks like this. I have the Raspberry Pi and RetroPC connected to their own switch over Ethernet using static IP addresses. The Raspberry Pi also connects to my home network over Wi-Fi, allowing me to get on my main PC and access RetroNAS's configuration interface and to transfer files to the Raspberry Pi from my main computer. To give you an idea how things are configured, I will quickly go through the steps, but for a more detailed guide, check the description for a link to one I created. The main thing to know is that your network card configuration will be different than mine, so you will need to identify your card and obtain its drivers. Also, since I'm using a Raspberry Pi, some things I refer to might be different depending on your system's configuration or even if you further customize your Pi. However, my guide should give you the general idea of what to do with your hardware. So here's an overview of what I did to set this up. First, let's make sure you're prepped. You'll need RetroNAS installed, your directory set up, and the cockpit web interface ready to go. I'm using a Raspberry Pi 5, but these steps should work with any device running RetroNAS. Next, enable SSH on your Raspberry Pi. This lets us easily transfer files using SFTP later. For connectivity, I've got my RetroPC and Raspberry Pi hooked up to an Ethernet switch. I'll be using static IPs for both the RetroPC and the Pi's Ethernet port. Now for convenience, I'm connecting the Raspberry Pi's Wi-Fi to my main network. Wi-Fi is going to be using a different subnet than the Ethernet, allowing me to transfer files from other devices on my main network to the Pi, and keeping the RetroPCs isolated. With RetroNAS ready, we need to enable two key services, Samba and EtherDFS. Install both and ensure they're running. Our next step is setting up the USB drive. Head over to the Cockpit web interface for this. EtherDFS works best with drives formatted in FAT32 or FAT16. RetroNAS offers the vFAT file system type for this, and you can use drives up to 2 terabytes. When creating your partition, it's crucial to set the mounting point to this, data/RetroNAS/DOS. This is where both EtherDFS and Samba expect your DOS files to be located. Set the type to vFAT like I mentioned earlier, and you might not need this, but I had to add a specific mounting option to allow writing to the drive for my RetroPC. Remember to change Retro to your Raspberry Pi's username. For EtherDFS, we'll need the MAC address of your Raspberry Pi's Ethernet port. You can find this in the Cockpit web interface by navigating to Networking and selecting ETH0, or whatever your Ethernet card is identified as. The MAC address will be listed there. Once your USB drive is formatted and properly mounted, you're ready to copy your DOS files to the Raspberry Pi. For ease of use, I'm using SFTP to transfer files over Wi-Fi. Remember, copy all files to the /data/RetroNAS/DOS folder on the Raspberry Pi. Your RetroPCs will expect the files to be there. Finally, for the RetroNAS setup, here's one simple tip to save you headaches. Make sure all your computers are using the same workgroup name. On the Raspberry Pi, you can set this in the smb.conf file. It is located at /etc/samba/smb.conf. I'm calling my workgroup lu_source, but feel free to choose any name. Just ensure it's the same across all your machines on the Retro network. The next step is to set up the operating systems on the RetroPC. For DOS, you'll need to grab the appropriate packet driver and network utilities. If you don't know where to find your drivers, the Vogon's driver library is a good place to start. Otherwise, you would have to search on your own. Next, download the EtherDFS client and copy that over to your MS-DOS install. Now you need to edit your autoexec.bat and config.sys files to get your network card working. I added these lines to my autoexec file, and I added these lines to my config file. Keep in mind that your network card settings will likely be different, so refer to its instructions. Once the config and autoexec files are configured, go ahead and reboot your computer. After the reboot, you can run the EtherDFS command. Make sure this portion of the command is set to your Raspberry Pi's MAC address, and this portion is set to the drive letter you want to use. I personally chose the Y drive. From then on, just treat that EtherDFS drive like any other drive on your PC. For EtherDFS, there's no need to set up a workgroup, which simplifies things a little. One thing to note is that the optical disk emulator I use for DOS does not work when EtherDFS is enabled, so I would have to install games that require CD-ROMs locally instead of over the network. Alright, now it's time to set up Windows 3 networking. For this, you'll need to have installed the Windows for Workgroups version. Trust me, it makes setting up networking so much easier. Once you have that operating system installed, the first step is to install your network card drivers. Next, you'll need to obtain and add the Microsoft TCP/IP protocol in the network settings. I'll provide a link in the description below, so you won't have to go searching. With TCP/IP installed, configure your IP address. Again, I'm using a static IP address here. When asked, make sure to use the exact same workgroup name as you set on your Raspberry Pi. After restarting, log in with your RetroNAS credentials. Then open up File Manager, click on the Disk menu to Network Drive, and from here, you can set up a drive letter that points to the DOS share on your RetroNAS server. Now, just treat this network drive as you would any other drive on your PC. You can save files, install programs, and browse it just like any other local drive. Now let me summarize how to set up Windows 98, specifically Windows 98 SE. First things first, make sure your network card drivers are installed and functioning. Next, confirm that the TCP/IP protocol is installed. Configure your IP address in the TCP/IP settings. I'm using a static IP address. Make sure the workgroup name you use is the same that was set on the RetroNAS server. Once you confirm all these settings, Windows 98 will prompt you to restart the computer. After restarting, you will be presented with a login prompt. Log in using the RetroNAS server credentials you created when you initially set up your RetroNAS system. My RetroNAS username is Retro. The next step is to map the shared DOS folder in RetroNAS as a drive in Windows 98. There are two ways to do this. One way is to open up Network Neighborhood on the desktop. A server called RetroSMB should show up. Double-click on it and some folders will show up. We only care about the DOS folder. If for some reason browsing Network Neighborhood doesn't work, you can access the server by opening up My Computer on the desktop. Then on the address bar at the top, you can type one of two things, either //RetroSMB or // followed by the actual IP address of your RetroNAS Ethernet connection. Now to map the network drive. Right-click on the DOS folder and then select Map Network Drive. Select the drive letter you want to assign to this share. I'm mapping it as the Y drive. Make sure Reconnect at Logon is selected. Hit OK, and that's it. You can treat this network drive just as you would any other drive in Windows 98. You can copy files, run programs, and manage your retro library. So now you can enjoy your new setup. So let's go over the usage. My primary motivation for setting this up was to simply establish a centralized file location. In DOS, I run the etherdfs command to map a drive letter of my choice to the RetroNAS folder. In Windows for Workgroups, when TCP/IP is installed, I can use File Manager to map a network folder as a drive letter. And in Windows 98, if I also have TCP/IP installed and configured, I can use Network Neighborhood to also map a folder to a drive letter. It is highly convenient to have a single repository for frequently used and important files. You can see that I have folders containing installation files, floppy images, and CD-ROM disk images. These items store games, drivers, and software that I can either install or run at any given time. Just as long as I'm connected to the network, of course. The CD-ROM disk images are really only useful in Windows 98 because I can utilize daemon tools to mount CD-ROM disk images. For DOS and Windows 3.1 users, there are some hardware projects that let you mount CD-ROM images. There is the USB ODE that turns a Raspberry Pi into a USB optical disk emulator. There is also the upcoming Pico IDE project that you connect to the IDE port on your RetroPC. Check out my video covering these projects if you want to find out more. I'll also provide links to other similar projects in the description. There are some free DOS software tools that let you mount CD-ROM images, but they are not very convenient. I also created videos on them so you can decide for yourself if you want to use them. Another useful usage for RetroNAS is to install games directly on the network. This can help you conserve space on your RetroPC and more easily back up your saves from RetroNAS. And that's pretty much it. Overall, I'm really happy with how this setup turned out. RetroNAS did exactly what I needed. A centralized place to store my games, drivers, and utilities that all my retro machines can access without eating up space on the local PC storage. Would I recommend it? Definitely. Especially if you're juggling multiple retro operating systems like I am. The combination of etherdfs for DOS and Samba for Windows makes it pretty flexible. Just be prepared to spend some time troubleshooting things, especially network drivers in DOS. RetroNAS is not plug and play, but once it's running, it's really solid and a great experience. As for what's next, I'd like to keep expanding the RetroNAS capabilities and maybe explore some of the other built-in services. There's still a lot I haven't dug into yet. On my to-do list is setting up the Web1 web proxy that allows me to browse modern websites on my RetroPC. I also want to set up a BBS, and RetroNAS provides the Mystic BBS to do just that. Look out for future videos regarding those. Anyway, if you found this video helpful, give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss any future content. And if you do run RetroNAS, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear your experience. Thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you next time.